When a ruthless Korean mafia boss tries to drag Sandra Bullock's character into his violent world, he doesn't just threaten her freedom. He shatters the last boundary of her oldest friend, played by Keanu Reeves. Forced out of the shadows, Keanu's quiet protector becomes her final line of defense, drawing a blood-soaked line in the streets that the mafia can't cross and survive. The quiet line. Sometimes you can feel a story changing your heartbeat as you tell it. This is one of those stories, where three people walk into the same evening and none of them leave with the same soul. The rain had just stopped when Sandra stepped out of the black car and into the narrow street of lanterns and neon. She pulled her coat a little closer around her silk dress, more from nerves than from the chill. Tonight was supposed to be simple: a charity dinner, a few speeches, and a quiet ride home. Beside her, Keanu walked with the easy, careful grace of a man who never wanted attention but always drew it anyway. He held the door to the restaurant for her like it was the most natural thing in the world, the same way he always did, as if his whole job in life was to make sure she never had to touch a handle alone. Inside, the restaurant glowed with warm light, all polished wood and small tables crowded with important faces. Sandra smiled, that familiar, gentle smile she had trained herself to wear even when she was tired or afraid. She was here to raise money for a refuge for kids caught in gang violence, and that mattered more to her than the cameras or the gossip. Kindness, she believed, was a long game. You planted it in dark places and hoped it would grow where no one was watching. Keanu stayed a step behind, letting her move first like he always did. He wasn't here as a movie star tonight. He was here as the quiet friend who knew when she needed a glass of water, when she needed a joke, and when she just needed someone standing in the same room, saying nothing. People came up to them, shaking hands, laughing, talking about projects and premieres. He nodded, answered politely, but his eyes kept drifting, scanning the room the way they did when his instincts hummed, catching shadows other people missed. That was when the man in the charcoal suit appeared, moving through the crowd with practiced charm. His name was Yi Min. To everyone else in the room, he was a respected Korean businessman, a generous donor with perfect manners and a smile that could sell anything. He reached for Sandra's hand with both of his, warm and confident, and his eyes held hers a second longer than politeness required. "I've waited a long time to meet you in person," he said. His English was smooth, almost musical. "What you're doing for those children, it's beautiful. The world doesn't deserve people like you." Sandra felt a small flush rise in her cheeks, part gratitude, part discomfort. Compliments had always sat strangely on her, like clothes in the wrong size. "Thank you," she answered. "We're just trying to help where we can. It takes a lot of people." Yi Min's gaze flicked to Keanu for a fraction of a second, measuring him, then returning to Sandra with a slightly brighter smile. "And some people," he said, "are willing to stand in front when it gets dangerous. That's rare." Keanu said nothing, but something in his shoulders tightened, a nearly invisible shift. He'd seen men like this before, men who wore generosity like a polished mask, men whose eyes never really smiled. For a moment, his stare met Yi Min's across Sandra's shoulder, calm, almost polite, but with a quiet depth that seemed to ask a question and offer a warning at the same time. The conversation flowed on. Yi Min listened when Sandra spoke about the shelter, asked careful questions, promised support. He laughed at the right places, told a story about his difficult childhood that hinted at struggle without revealing anything real. Sandra felt a pull of empathy toward him. The way he described hunger and cold nights sounded too honest to be invented. She saw a boy in those memories, not a powerful man. And that old, stubborn part of her heart whispered that maybe this was another life she could help turn a little gentler. Yet the whole time, Keanu's silence stood between them like an invisible line. He watched the way Yi Min's hand lingered a moment too long on Sandra's arm when he guided her to the table. He noticed how the man positioned himself between her and the door, like he was drawing a circle around her without asking. He heard the softness in Yi Min's tone when he said her name, the softness that wasn't quite respect and not quite possession, but something uneasy in between. As the speeches began and the room dimmed, Sandra glanced back over her shoulder. Keanu stood at the edge of the crowd, arms loosely folded, eyes never really leaving her. She knew that look. It was the same look he'd had years ago when a drunk fan had cornered her near a hotel elevator, the same look when a producer had raised his voice at her on set. It was his quiet promise, "If it turns bad, I'm here." She gave him the smallest nod, as if to say, "I'm okay. I've got this." For a while, it almost seemed true. The auction went well, the donors were generous, and Sandra felt that fragile, glowing hope that maybe tonight would mean more beds, more meals, one more kid pulled off the street. When Yi Min raised his paddle and doubled an already huge bid, the room applauded. He leaned toward her, voice low. "See," he said, "together we can change so many lives." But as the night thinned and the crowd began to drift away, Yi Min suggested a private toast in the smaller back courtyard of the restaurant, just to discuss a larger partnership. He said it lightly, but his eyes didn't really wait for her agreement. Keanu took a step closer, ready to suggest they all leave instead, that tomorrow would be better for business talk. Before he could speak, Yi Min's phone lit up on the table. A name flashed for only a second in Korean, along with a small icon. Keanu didn't understand the words, but he knew the symbol beneath the caller ID, a black tiger wrapped around a blade. He had seen it burned into doors and carved into skin in another life, long before anyone thought of him as gentle. His breath caught, cold and sharp. That symbol did not belong in charity dinners with warm lights and polite speeches. It belonged to the Korean Mafia. Across from him, Yi Min casually flipped the phone over, hiding the screen, and smiled at Sandra as if nothing had changed at all. Keanu's heart slowed to a heavy, deliberate beat. The room still glowed, Sandra still smiled, but the story had just shifted, and he knew it with the certainty of a man who had spent too many nights walking out of rooms like this with blood on his shoes. He watched Sandra rise to follow Yi Min toward the courtyard, her kindness leading the way, unaware of the shadow at her back, unaware that the line between her world and his had already been crossed in silence. The courtyard promise. The courtyard smelled of wet stone and jasmine. Lanterns hung above like small moons, their light soft enough to make danger look almost gentle. Sandra stepped out first, heels tapping lightly on the bricks, wrapping her arms around herself now that the night had gone colder. Yi Min followed with 2 glasses of champagne, the picture of relaxed confidence, as if this moment was just another pleasant business talk. He handed her a glass and took his time standing beside her, much closer than the room inside would have allowed. For a moment they both watched the city rise beyond the narrow wall, all glass and lights and quiet, expensive power. "Do you ever think," he asked softly, "that the world is built by the people willing to do ugly things for beautiful reasons?" His question sounded like philosophy, but it carried something heavier underneath. Sandra took a slow breath, searching for the right answer. She believed in hard choices, yes, but not in cruelty dressed up as sacrifice. "I think," she said carefully, "the world changes when people are kind even when it costs them something, not when they hurt others and call it necessary." Her voice was gentle, but there was steel in it too. Kindness had never meant weakness to her. Behind them, near the doorway, she knew Keanu was standing just out of sight, giving her space but close enough to hear every word. That thought steadied her. Yi Min smiled in a way that didn't quite reach his eyes. "You're pure," he murmured. "That's why you can say that." He set his glass down on the low wall and turned fully to face her. "Let me be honest, I don't just want to donate, I want to partner. I can move money fast in ways your board can't. I can get you buildings in neighborhoods the government ignores, food, protection." He took a small step closer. "In return, I only need one thing, your name on everything, and your loyalty when people start asking questions." The words landed like cold water. Sandra's fingers tightened around the stem of her glass. "Loyalty," she repeated. "You mean lying?" He lifted one shoulder, almost playful. "I mean understanding. The money is already dirty before it reaches you. With me, at least it cleans some of the blood." His voice lowered. "You want to save those kids, don't you? I'm offering you a way to save 10 times more. A little silence is a small price." Sandra's heart pounded. She thought of the small faces at the shelter, the way they flinched when doors slammed, the way they clung to stuffed animals that were barely more than threads. 10 times more beds could mean 10 times more children safe. But she also saw tonight's headlines in her mind, charity exposed as Mafia front. Every life she had tried to help smeared, every promise broken. She shook her head slowly. "If I build something on lies," she whispered, "it will fall on the kids first. I won't do that." For the first time, irritation flashed in Yi Min's eyes. His jaw tightened just a little. "You think you're above this," he said. "But the world doesn't care how clean your hands are, Sandra. It only cares how strong you are." His hand reached out and wrapped around her upper arm, not yet painful, but firm enough that she felt the message. "Listen to me." Instantly, she tried to pull back, and that small movement made his fingers harden. The courtyard door opened with a quiet creak, and Keanu stepped out of the shadows like he had been carved from the night itself. His eyes went straight to Yi Min's hand on Sandra's arm, then to her face, reading the fear she was trying to swallow. Everything in him wanted to move fast to break the grip to end this, but he forced his voice to stay calm. "You're holding on to someone who already said no," he said softly. "You should let go before you make this a different kind of conversation." Yi Min didn't look away. His thumb pressed once hard into Sandra's skin, leaving a promise of a bruise. "And who exactly are you to define the kind of conversation we're having?" he asked, his tone still polite but colder now, as if a door inside him had just closed with a click Sandra could not yet hear. Old shadows, new wounds. Sleep did not come for any of them that night. Sandra lay awake replaying the pressure of Yi Min's fingers on her arm, the way his voice had shifted when she said no. She kept asking herself if she had overreacted, if maybe stress and old fears had made everything seem darker than it was. Then she looked at the faint purple mark blooming on her skin, and the question answered itself. Still, mixed with the fear was something else. A stubborn regret that the boy he had once been, the hungry child in his story, had turned into a man who thought control was the same thing as care. Keanu sat on the floor of his living room, back against the couch, phone face down on the coffee table. He had promised himself years ago that he would never again go looking for the kind of information he had recognized on Yi Min's phone. But promises made in peace feel different when danger is already standing in your doorway. Finally, he picked up the phone and called a number he had deleted 3 times and memorized 10 more. A quiet voice answered in Korean, and with every low exchange, the past pushed itself a little further into the present. By morning, he knew the truth. Yi Min was not just connected to the Korean Mafia. He was a rising boss, a man known for being calm until the second he wasn't, a man who liked to own whatever he touched. The donations he had made to smaller charities overseas had come with strings, and some of those charities no longer existed. A fire here, a robbery there, no charges, no justice, just stories that ended too quickly. Keanu listened, jaw clenched, as the contact on the other end paused and said almost gently, "If he has noticed her, it won't be easy to make him forget." When Sandra arrived at the shelter that afternoon, the staff looked anxious. An envelope had been delivered by courier, no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper. On it, in clean, expensive ink, were financial projections, how much her foundation could expand if it accepted strategic partnership funds. At the bottom, there was a small photograph, one of the kids from the shelter, a 12-year-old boy who always flinched at loud noises, taken as he walked home from school. The message needed no explanation. "I see what you love. I can reach it." Her knees nearly buckled. For a moment, shame washed over her, hot and sharp, because some small corner of her mind had wished his offer could be real without cost. Now the cost was standing right in front of her in the form of a child who had already seen too much. She called Keanu with shaking hands, her voice tight. "He sent a picture of Mateo," she whispered. "He's watching the kids." Keanu arrived at the shelter faster than she thought possible, his calm stretched thin. He looked at the photo, at the letter, then at her. There was a war in his eyes between the man he had worked so hard to become and the man he had buried. "We go to the police," he said immediately. "We put everything on record, threats, the bruise, the letter. We don't play his game." Sandra hesitated. If we go public now and they connect him to the shelter, he could still hurt them before anyone stops him. You know how slow the system moves. He's warning us that he can move faster. Her voice cracked. "I can't risk starting a fight that lands on their shoulders instead of ours." She hated that it sounded like fear, when what she wanted it to be was courage. "Then what?" Keanu asked. "You meet him alone again and hope he finds a conscience." His words weren't cruel, but they were edged. He was terrified, and when he was terrified, he told the truth without any decoration. Sandra met his gaze. "Not alone," she said. "Not hoping. I need to look him in the eyes and make it clear that he doesn't own me or the children or my silence. If I let him scare me into hiding, he's already halfway there." He wanted to tell her no. He wanted to pick her up and carry her to the safest place he knew and stand in front of the door until everything burned down or gave up. But there was a deeper respect in him, one that knew her bravery was not a thing to be protected from but protected for. He exhaled slowly. "If you're going to see him," he said, "I'm already there before you walk through the door. I'm not asking." That evening, Sandra called the number on the card Yi Min had slipped into her hand before she left the restaurant. His voice came on the line smooth, almost pleased. She told him they needed to talk, somewhere public, somewhere with cameras. He laughed quietly. "You don't negotiate with me, Sandra, you request, and I decide." He gave her the address of a private penthouse lounge instead, high above the city, where the only eyes would be his. "Come alone," he added. "If you bring your shadow, I will take it as an insult." She closed her eyes, fingers gripping the phone. "You don't get to tell me who cares about me," she answered, surprising herself with the firmness in her own voice. "If you want to talk, you'll talk with both of us there." For a heartbeat, silence stretched so thin she thought the line had died. Then his tone changed, cool and flat. "You just made this personal," he said. "Be on the roof at 9. If you're even a minute late, I'll start looking for other ways to get your attention." The call ended. Sandra looked at the dark screen and felt the weight of every life now threaded into this choice. When she turned to tell Keanu, her voice barely above a whisper, she saw that he had already picked up his jacket, that quiet decision in his eyes. Before she could finish repeating the address, the power flickered, the shelter lights blinked once and then steadied. An ordinary glitch that, in that moment, felt like the city itself taking a sharp, nervous breath it could not release. The rooftop in the past. The elevator ride to the penthouse felt too quiet. The mirrored walls reflected Sandra and Keanu back at themselves, two figures dressed simply, nothing flashy, nothing that matched the world they were stepping into. She could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands hung loose but ready at his sides, and she knew this version of him. It was the one that had carried her through grief years before, the one that stayed calm when she fell apart. Tonight, that calm had a harder edge. When the doors opened, a private lobby stretched out, marble floors and a single glass door leading to the rooftop terrace. A man in a dark suit stood waiting, eyes empty, hands folded. He checked them for weapons with polite detachment, though his touch was rougher than necessary on Keanu's ribs, a small test of dominance he pretended not to notice. Once he was done, he nodded toward the door. "He's expecting you," the man said. The rooftop was a world of its own. Soft music played from hidden speakers. White couches circled low tables covered in bottles that cost as much as a month's rent for most of the city. Tall glass panels framed a view that made the streets below look like another universe. Yi Min sat near the edge, a drink in his hand, suit jacket off, shirt sleeves rolled up, as if he had invited them for a late, casual drink among friends. Sandra saw something new in him up close in this almost private space. The tattoos she had only glimpsed before curled around his forearms, dark lines of a story written in ink and blood. One of the designs was the black tiger she now knew too well. Another was a series of small, careful marks that looked almost like tally lines. She wondered what they counted: debts, victories, losses, or people. "You came," he said, standing to greet them. His eyes flicked over Keanu, colder now, but he forced a smile. "And you brought your guardian, loyal, I can respect that." He waved them to sit. "Let's talk about loyalty and respect then. It's time to be very clear." Sandra remained standing. "You involved a child, Yi Min," she said. "That ends now. Whatever anger you have, point it at me, not at them." Her voice shook, but she didn't lower her gaze. "You don't get to threaten kids and then ask for respect." A muscle in his cheek twitched. He set his drink down so carefully it was almost graceful. "You think that photo was a threat? That was me showing you how easily I can protect what you care about or not if you insist on standing against me." He stepped closer, hands in his pockets. "I grew up where no one protected anything. Men like the ones I command now took everything they wanted. I decided I'd never be the one on the floor again. So yes, I reach first. I hold tight." "That is how you survive." Keanu spoke up quietly. "I've seen the floor from both sides," he said. "I walked away when I realized survival meant becoming the same monster that made me bleed. You know exactly who I am, don't you?" His words hung there, and Sandra felt a chill. She had heard rumors over the years about things he had done before fame, stories he never confirmed and she never pressed him to share. Yi Min's eyes narrowed, studying him. "They used to tell stories about you," he admitted. About the man who could empty a room without raising his voice, a ghost they hired when they wanted someone gone without a trace. There was a flicker of respect and something like resentment. And now you play the quiet saint, holding coats and opening doors. Tell me, does the blood wash off when the cameras come on? The words hit Keanu like a blow, not because they were entirely true, but because they weren't completely false. Shame stirred in his chest, the old kind, the one that whispered he didn't deserve peace or kindness. He let the feeling pass through him and answered anyway. "No," he said simply. "It doesn't wash off. That's why I don't spill any more of it if I can help it." Sandra stepped between them, not as a shield, but as a bridge. "This isn't about who either of you used to be," she said. "It's about who you're choosing to be now. You have power, Yi-Min, real power. You can choose to use it to build something that doesn't need fear to stand." She swallowed. "Walk away from this. Take your money, your men, your stories, and leave the shelter out of it. You can keep every other rotten corner you've carved out, but don't make children pay for your war." For a long moment, he just looked at her. Something moved in his expression, a flash of the boy he had described at the charity dinner, cold and alone and convinced no one would ever stand up for him. The idea that someone would stand up to him for the sake of kids who weren't even theirs, it puzzled him, almost offended him. "You think walking away makes me strong?" he asked softly. "It makes me weak. It tells everyone they can push me if they find the right soft place." His fingers brushed a scar on his own forearm, half hidden by ink. "I spent my life closing those places." He turned, motioning with 2 fingers. Suddenly, men appeared from the edges of the rooftop, 3, then 4, then more, stepping out from behind planters and glass panels, surrounding them at a respectful distance. No guns drawn yet, but the message was unmistakable. "You came here thinking this was a conversation," he said. "You were wrong. This is a decision. You either stand with me, lend me your light, and I promise you no one will ever touch those children, or you stand against me. And I remind the city what happens when people forget who is in charge." Sandra felt the circle closing around them. Fear pressed against her ribs, but there was also an unexpected calm rising underneath. She had spent her life talking about courage to kids who had seen worse than this. Now it was her turn to live it, not in speeches, but in the way she chose her next words. She reached for Keanu's hand without looking, a small, grounding pressure. Keanu squeezed back once, just enough to say, "I'm here." Then he stepped slightly in front of her, not to hide her, but to share whatever was coming. His voice was almost gentle when he answered. "If you hurt her," he told Yi-Min, "there is no version of this story where you win. Maybe not tonight, maybe not tomorrow, but I promise you this doesn't end the way you think." The wind picked up, sweeping across the rooftop, carrying the city's noise up from below. Yi-Min studied him for a long, still moment, every line of his face hardening into something final. Then he nodded to his men. "Then let's see," he said quietly, "what kind of man you really are when there's no camera watching." The breaking point. The first punch didn't come with a shout or a warning. It came from behind, a heavy fist slamming into Keanu's side as one of the men stepped in, testing him. Pain exploded through his ribs, but his body moved almost before his mind caught up, turning, deflecting the next blow with his forearm, shifting Sandra out of the immediate circle without even thinking. Years of buried training rose to the surface, a language his muscles still remembered even though he had stopped speaking it. He didn't strike back, not yet. He blocked, dodged, let their own momentum knock them sideways. "You still have a choice," he called to Yi-Min between movements, breath tight but steady. "You can call this off before someone gets hurt in a way you can't undo." A second man lunged. Keanu hooked his arm, twisted, and sent him stumbling away with just enough force to make a point, not enough to break anything. For now. Sandra watched, heart hammering against her ribs, torn between terror and a painful kind of awe. She had always known there were chapters of his life he kept closed, but seeing them open like this felt like reading a language she wished didn't have to exist. Every time he moved, she could feel the care under the violence, the way he kept his strikes controlled, his eyes always flicking back to her to make sure she was still standing. He was fighting like a man who wanted to end this without destroying anyone, even the ones trying to destroy him. Yi-Min's expression darkened. This was not the spectacle he had imagined. He had expected Keanu to crumble or to return fully to the ghost the stories had built, a creature of pure, efficient brutality. Instead, the man in front of him fought with restraint, with rules, with a frustrating, stubborn mercy. "You think holding back makes you noble?" he shouted above the scuffle. "It makes you predictable." He snapped his fingers, and one of his men pulled a gun from inside his jacket, the metal catching the rooftop lights. The sight of the weapon changed everything in an instant. The air went thin. Sandra froze, the sound of her own blood rushing in her ears. Keanu's body went still too, but in a different way, a coiled stillness, every sense locking onto that single, gleaming line of danger now pointed somewhere between his chest and hers. He lifted his hands slowly, positioning himself more clearly between the gun and Sandra without making it obvious enough to trigger a panic shot. "Guns mean you're afraid this won't go your way," he said quietly. "Put it down and we walk out of here. No police, no names. You can rewrite this night however you want in your head." His voice was calm, but inside something old was waking fully, something he had kept buried under years of gentle roles and quiet kindness. It wasn't rage. It was a cold, clear commitment. No one dies here because of me. Not her. Not if I can help it. Sandra stepped forward, despite every instinct screaming at her to stay behind him. "This is your chance," she told Yi Min, her voice shaking but loud enough for every man to hear. "You say you don't want to be the one on the floor again? Then stop acting like the one who put you there. Do something different just once. Show them you're more than fear in a suit." For a heartbeat, the rooftop seemed to hold its breath. Some of the men shifted, uncertainty flickering in their eyes. Many of them had grown up in stories like Yi Min's, and for a moment her words slipped through the armor. They weren't used to being seen as something other than weapons. Being asked to choose felt strange. That flicker was exactly what Yi Min could not allow. His gaze hardened to ice, his pride screaming louder than any buried boyhood hurt. "You talk like the world is a fair fight," he said, stepping closer to Sandra now, ignoring the gun, ignoring Keanu's tensed frame. "It is. It's a table rigged by men who grabbed what they wanted and dared others to stop them." He reached out and gently, almost tenderly, brushed a strand of hair from her face. Then his fingers slid to her jaw, gripping just a little too tight. "And right now I have what I want, your attention, your fear, your saint with blood on his hands." Keanu's vision narrowed. He saw only two things, Yi Min's hand on Sandra's face and the gun still pointed in their direction. His pulse slowed instead of speeding up, falling into that dangerous, familiar rhythm where everything else dulled except the path in front of him. He had tried words. He had tried mercy. He had tried to honor the man he wanted to be. But there it was, the line. He had drawn it quietly in his heart the first time he met Sandra, years ago, when she trusted him with her tears and her laughter and her fragile hope that people could still be kind in a brutal business. He had drawn it again when she opened the shelter, promising himself that whatever ghosts he carried would never step over its threshold. No one would turn those children into bargaining chips as long as he could stand. Now Yi Min's thumb pressed harder into her skin, leaving a white mark that would bloom red when he let go. If he let go. The gun shifted, the man holding it glancing uncertainly at his boss, at the woman, at the quiet fury in Keanu's eyes. Keanu exhaled once, slow and final, like a man accepting a sentence he had written himself. When he spoke, his voice was low, almost gentle, but it carried across the rooftop with the weight of a verdict. "Take your hand off her," he said, "and tell your man to drop the gun. That's the last line I'm giving you." Yi Min's lips curved into something that was not quite a smile. "Or what?" he asked. And in the space between those two words and Keanu's next breath, the night hung on a knife's edge, waiting to see which version of him would step forward. The man of peace he had fought to become, or the shadow he had sworn never to unleash again.